Okay, let's get started and welcome everybody. I'm Brian Israel. I'm the chair of Friends of Israel's Environment, which is a US-based not-for-profit that supports Adam Tov Vadin in Israel. And we have a great program. It's a wonderful Sunday morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. And we're very happy that that you're able to join us for this conversation. It's going to be casual and interactive. If you have questions during the conversation that you want to post on the Q&A, that would be great. Otherwise, we'll have a lively discussion about both COP27 as well as the recent change, the election in Israel, and hopefully get some great insights from Tammy and Yossi about what lies ahead in the next year or so. Before we get started, let me ask Tammy and Yossi, if you could introduce yourself. Tammy, you want to go first?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tammy Ganot. I am the Deputy CEO of Adam Tov Vadin. And I've just returned from the COP, from the conference in Sharm el-Sheikh. Adam Tov Vadin has, it's a Hebrew name for, that stands for man, nature, and law. And that is sort of the concept of what we're here to protect. And we have on observer, we are an accredited observer organization under the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. And under that capacity, we went to the COP and tried to be there, and I'll be happy to discuss the thoughts, the ideas, and looking forward post COP. So yeah, looking forward.
Wonderful. Yossi.
So I'm a social activist who, by mistake, fell into the solar business and created with partners the solar industry in the state of Israel and in many African countries. In Israel now, I'm solely a volunteer with Adam Tov Vadin, with the teenagers and Chaim B'Sviva, the umbrella group. And I have to say, like, Adam Tov Vadin was my go-to for climate justice, for climate law, for meaningful partnership. I think it's one of the best leverage plays in the environmental movement. So always happy to be here with Tammy.
Wonderful.
Brian, we go back also, right?
Yes. Yossi and I go back to Boston University many decades ago. So well, let's get started. I'm gonna try a little technical see if I can share my screen. Here's an article, just for a second. Thumbs up if that's working. This is an article last week from Times of Israel. Activists smash tablets atop Mount Sinai to launch faith-based climate push. And the picture of the person there smashing a green tablet is none other than Yossi Abramowitz. So Yossi, can you? It's an article about the Sinai Climate Partnership. So maybe we'll start with you, and you could give us a little insight as to what is the Sinai Climate Partnership, and what were you doing smashing a tablet on?
Allegedly, you notice my face wasn't showing. Allegedly. So actually, the UN Secretary General, when he closed the COP27 this morning, I'm going to read you his quote. COP27 took place not far from Mount Sinai, a site that is central to many faiths and to the story of Moses or Musa. It's fitting. Climate chaos is a crisis of biblical proportions. The signs are everywhere. Instead of a burning bush, we face a burning planet. What this was an attempt by a group of activists really to leverage the moral platform that Sinai represents to billions of people, and to kind of say enough is enough. That message is now reverberated positively and negatively globally. And we were supposed to bring 30 faith leaders from like all the major religions, and the Egyptians blocked us. So in London, the Elijah Institute, Interfaith Institute, did a whole repentance ceremony for the sins against the earth. And on 10 different mountaintops around the world, including a few of us on Sinai, we read out like 10 new commandments related to climate. And the bottom line is, and Tommy can tell you, this is the 27th gathering of the world leaders. And I don't really think there's been much improvement. And so we wanted to be able to strengthen the moral voices of youth and of religious leaders to add a sense of urgency. And my dad just joined. Oh, but he has my personal link. Hey, Dad. Don't speak.
I didn't know parents can join.
Dad, you can go off video if you want, because you're actually we are on the panelist link.
How nice is that?
Okay, I'm out of here.
That's okay. That was a fun surprise. By the way, Yossi, if you I think I saw that one of your events will be in the United States. Is that right?
Well, one of the mountaintops, we were going to do New York, but that didn't work out. This already happened. This was on the Sunday of COP itself. Normally, if you remember from last year, the demonstrations sort of create like a headwind for trying to get something positive done. In Egypt, it's a police state, and it's not like they were going to allow massive demonstrations. And so we wanted to use the moral force of religious leaders to try to turn the corner a bit.
But just to add something to that point, Yossi, because I think it actually had a very interesting impact. The fact that Egypt did not allow demonstrations outside, but the organizer, the UN, did look for a way to allow civil society to raise its voice. It actually allowed a lot more demonstration and public events within the compounds of the conference itself, which actually was closer to leaders and to decision makers and to the negotiations room. So I think, I don't know, that actually might have some influence on the one successful thing that did come out of the COP. So I don't know.
Yes.
Good.
Which we'll talk about in more detail, and then but let me ask you a question. You were there at COP27 at Sharm representing Adam Tov, as you said. So maybe you could just give an overview of what was your goal on behalf of Adam Tov. Why were you there, and what were you hoping to convey and accomplish?
Well, there are really two spheres, spirit goals. Okay, one is impacting, and the other is learning and connecting. So on the impact side, the idea is to go and to use what's happening on a global scale, and not just the negotiations on the document, for the closing document of the COP itself, but also the discussions about climate finance, about subsidies to fossil fuels, about climate legislation and litigation, climate justice, to bring all that and to use that to influence Israeli government and decision making, and to try to incorporate some of the more advanced initiatives that we see worldwide into Israeli policy. Because and this has to be said, and I know we're gonna go into the the global situation later, but or I imagine we will, but however frustrated we are, like we also mentioned, of this being the 27th meeting and still not enough progress, not fast enough, not substantial enough. In Israel, we're still behind the little progress that has been made. So the idea is to take this, this global agenda, this again, a lot of initiatives, inspirations, and frameworks, and to translate it to Israeli reality, and to use both informal meeting with governmental officials during the conference, but also afterwards and before, to sort of raise the voice of climate and try to make it part of Israeli policy. And then on the other side, and that I really think it's a marvelous opportunity on that end, is really to learn, and we learn a lot. We learn a lot about new aspects of climate litigation, of torts law as applied to climate change, on climate justice, on again innovative financial instruments to create a better climate economics. And I think that this learning opportunity that comes together with collaboration with colleagues around the world. I mean, we've discussed joint programs with environmental lawyers from Spain and from South Korea and from Mexico in order to work together to apply better legislative and legal frameworks to climate and environmental injustices and problems, that I think it's really a very unique opportunity in that sense, that everybody comes together and you know, this hub happens. So those were our goals.
That's fantastic. What would you, it's really a question for both of you. What would you say is the most important success from COP27? Maybe one thing that's obvious and one thing that's a little surprising, since we we're reading a lot about some of the successes, but from your perspective.
Well, I'll just continue, and then I'll let you, Yossi, be the more optimistic one. But I think, you know, there is one big success, and I can see it not because I don't think we understand completely the gravity of this step forward, but I can see colleagues from developing countries, from very, very vulnerable countries, who have are ecstatic about the this new climate fund that's being, and it's still, there are still a lot of questions as to how much money, and how will the money be dispersed, and who will be part of the mechanism, etc. So there's a lot of vagueness still around it, but this step is a huge step forward in sort of accepting responsibility for damages done. So looking, I think I would say that looking backwards, from the looking backwards aspect, that's a big step forward, something that hasn't been done before. You know, richer countries, developed countries taking responsibility, willing to put some money on it. And looking forward as to the things that need to be done to stop or to mitigate the global warming, to keep 1.5 alive, you know, to keep the global warming to a degree that we can still live and thrive in. I think on that end, successes are a lot less. Well, that's a failure. Just simply put, that's a failure.
Yossi, what's your perspective?
So I have a bunch of thoughts. One is we do usually use the Israeli government participation at these climate conferences to show them how out of the global consensus Israel is. And they sort of like, they get this surprise. But what happened is right after our national election, right? And so Lapid cancels. Herzog is with us. We have an amazing climate president who's really kept his word on this, to me, to the kids, to the environmental community. And he ended up leading the delegation, but just for a day or two, because he had to scamper back to meet all the political parties. So I think we did not have that benefit this year. I'm not sure how many members of the incoming government were actually at COP. I didn't see any of them. What was very sad was giving Alon Tal a hug as he showed up on his last day as a Knesset member at the Israeli booth. And just, you know, here's a guy who, that if he was going to be the environment minister of Israel, he would have been the most qualified environmental minister in the world, anywhere in the world. And to mourn essentially the loss of so many of our environmental Knesset members not being in. There's still a couple, and you know, again, Tommy and I we're cooking up some plans, but we did not get that boost in terms of the domestic, I think, effect. The Israeli booth was a highlight. First time we had a pavilion, a real pavilion. It was respectable. It was our anchor. I would bring officials from Africa there, and that's who would meet and try to do, you know, solar power deals and do things that are transformative in space, because the screens are showing all of our technology, and you kind of have that, and that was extraordinarily positive. And it's all in the foreign ministry's Facebook Live, like it's 30-something sessions, and I think we were able to, as a country, demonstrate that we have real climate solutions. The missing ingredient, of course, is how can we sell our wares and our visions if our own house is burning and not in order? And that's a big missing step on Israeli policy. And you know, I don't know if it's going to sink in. The only time I think it will sink in, which will be soon, is when the Europeans put a carbon tax on all of our exports, and then we have like no choice. So I think we're going to very uncharted waters on the Israeli climate because we've lost our champions in a major way, and that's painful. COP itself, I have to say, is invigorating. You go from pavilion to pavilion, and the national garb and the different languages, and the people put a lot of effort into trying to look good. I just go like from pavilion to pavilion, going liar, 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 liar. Like, and there's this correlation that the more beautiful and sophisticated the booth, the more fossil fuels that country had, like the UAE and the Saudi. They weren't booths. They were whole beautifully designed sections, touting all their green Middle East and green Arabia visions. And so you just go liar, liar, liar. Okay, they're putting in a good effort, but they don't have any. You kind of walk through, and there is a sense that the fossil fuel industry has moved into this conference, that they've really. And what happened, if you look at all the reports, that 1.5 degrees is a great risk, and Egypt is partly to blame, but who are Egypt's main sponsors to keep it alive? Its economy is toast. I mean, it was 20 pounds per dollar when we arrived, and it was 25 pounds per dollar when we left. Like that's a dramatic thing. It's Saudi Arabia, UAE, China, essentially propping up that economy. And those are the ones in the back rooms who are like, we're not phasing out fossil fuels. It's not going to go in the last draft. And part of me celebrated, wow, it's going to be in Egypt, it's going to be in the Middle East, it's going to be in Africa, this conference. And I agree with Tommy, the only real success is right now it's symbolic by saying, yes, loss and damage is real. Like I heard a woman from Mozambique, she said, growing up, there used to be one cyclone a year that would come through and destroy a village or a bridge. This past year, we're only halfway through the cyclone season, it's been 12. So how can a poor country pay? Like they have a really, and they're not even emitting anything, of significance. So the climate justice was front and center. It's going to take a whole year until they've come up with the mechanism. And I was excited by many of the initiatives and the people, and John Kerry was just working it relentlessly. I was so proud as an American Israeli. I was so proud. I talked to him about Gaza and solar, but overall, I don't want to sugarcoat it. Tommy, I know I'm usually the optimist, but I think we slipped as a world community. I think we slipped backwards.
Did you when you were there, did you believe that the loss and damage fund would actually occur, or was it kind of touch and go till the end?
Look, it was definitely a touch and go, but they had to do something. And look, it was just the oil companies, again, buying more time, because there were two big agendas, right? It was keep it 1.5%, which means you have to burn less bad stuff, and there's loss and damage. It was much easier to give this, because right now there's almost no commitments at 300 million, whatever it is, it's symbolic. So to give this, we say victory, but the real battle, right? The real, I'll call it idol, right? That the world continues to worship and it needs to be smashed, has preserved and strengthened its stronghold on the world economy and on the decision makers.
It actually weakened the language that was, everybody criticized the previous COP, the one in Glasgow, COP 26, that the language was weak, and now we went even a step backwards. It's even weaker language, and the initiative that people tried to put into the new text about phase out of fossil fuels completely was very watered down into only addressing the issue of coal, and then the issue of having the emissions globally. The idea was to say that it has to be halved by 2025, because that's what science tells us needs to be done. I mean, it's not a matter of negotiation. It's what needs to be done if we want, to still live and prosper in 2030, 2040, and 2050. and that again was left out of the text and didn't get even into the draft. So
yeah, and
But-
one of the great supporters of Adam Tov Vadin, our mutually good friend Marla Stein, is sending me messages. She says, "Tell them that Chevron and Israel Chemicals were also there." And so we also there was a whole separate exhibit which I didn't go to of our bad guys, essentially our polluters, and can you say they shouldn't come? Like, I tend to be a freedom of speech type person, but just understand that they know how to work it. They know how to work it, and it translates to our own policies. That Tommy and Amit are going to try to propose a new climate bill, and
but not all. Just to say a word about that, because I actually was in part of one session in the bad guys zone, which was dubbed the innovation zone because everything is greenwashed. And we heard a statement by the head of the industry association in Israel, in the innovation zone, a session, we dedicated to Israel innovation, which really some of the technologies and innovative thinking in Israel are really amazing and can be part of the solution and can be pushed forward and there are really admirable. But the head of the association of the industry basically spoke and said, well, you can see things around the world, of course, the war in Ukraine and everything. So we said we would phase out coal until 2030. But can we do it? Can't we do it? I'm not sure. I mean, that was his innovative message. And that was very, very frustrating because it seems that and that's why I'm saying Israel is still behind, because even on that was agreed within the COP documents by all countries, Israel is still using a backwards lingo. So it's trying to still, and it's almost a hitchhiker's mentality. We don't need to do anything until we absolutely need to do something, and everybody else has done their share. And I think that's fortunate because we're losing in the game.
Let me just be contrarian to the two of you for a second and ask. I think that there's or I will posit that the kind of us them with industry, whether it's energy or cement or chemicals or whatever, is not particularly constructive. It's a little bit kind of, the way things used to be. And I'm not sure that kind of that dichotomy is really going to help us. And I would further posit that our governments are proven ineffective entities. And that's true, certainly true here. It's true at the national level, at the international level, at the local level. And so you have to leverage the goodwill of others besides governments, including companies, including energy companies. So how would you sort of respond to the kind of the slight pushback?
I'm sorry, I'm jumping in. You'll see, I'm sorry if I lose our margin. No, but because I agree with everything you said. I mean, I think businesses are a vital, crucial part of the solution. I'll say even something, I don't know, more maybe surprising. There was a lot of criticism on the fact that Coca-Cola was a sponsor for this COP. And the truth is, I said, I don't care that much about who sponsored the COP. I don't think that's what influences decision makers. I do think that the money, the undercurrents of money do influence that, but that's not that apparent, like being a sponsor. That's a lot more subtle, and it's done in more sophisticated ways. And however, I think that for businesses to become a true part of the solution, and I think it's self-explanatory almost that it's not us and them, because we're all in here on the same planet. I mean, we really are. It sounds almost naive, but we are. And they have to be part of it, and they're the one who are gonna move the industry towards its right place. But for that to happen, you have to have frameworks in place that will make sure that the change is genuine, that the conversation is authentic, that people cannot just say that the climate is important and then act in a completely different way. And for that, you have to have in place issues like transparency of the financial frameworks that currently support fossil fuels and do not support renewables, such as hidden subsidies and issues like that, such as planning procedures, permit procedures. So there are a lot of frameworks that actually make those businesses, and it's not all businesses, and it's not all corporates, and it's not even necessarily all fossil fuels, but make those who want to, who don't want to be part of the solution, they make it easy for them. And I think we need the frameworks in place to create a real incentive for all of us to do the move, to do the step forward, because I think if there's one thing that we can learn from all the latest reports coming out of the IPCC, is that there isn't one sector, one person that can say, I'm not part of this game. I don't need to do any change. I mean, we all have to do the change. And I think I agree with it completely. Corporations can be the leaders in this change, should be the leader in this change. But there's a context in which this can happen.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a very big difference between the U.S. and Israel on this. It is so nice to have America back in the game. Like, really, we missed you guys. We really missed you guys. And Biden was
we missed you too.
When you're about to unleash $400 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act, and so in America that this 50% cut in emissions is doable, possible, business friendly, etc. Right? We don't have that kind of framework in Israel, and we have a lot of monopolies in this tiny little country, and they know how to work the system really, really well. Now, $100 trillion is going to be on the move worldwide between now and 2030, and that's amazing towards clean energy. Our friend Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi has been posting questions. So yes, Jennifer, on more efficient farming, climate-friendly farming. Cement is this great new Israeli startup that wants to use salt, and it turns out when you crush salt, you can make cement. You can make bricks that are, I think, 8 times more stronger than cement without the CO2 emissions, and those kinds of things. So Israel is not there yet, and what I would love to see is really this relationship between the U.S. Jewish community, the U.S. environmental community, and the environmentalists in Israel. I think we can learn a lot from you, and I think every Israeli embassy and consulate should be visited by our friends in America, just like we did when Women of the Wall, when that blew up, or when the deportations of the asylum seekers. Like, there are big things that happened in which affected the world and American Jewry and their relationship, with Israel, and flooding the consulates with messages and meetings about this. I think it's fine for you to demand. You also want to see a climate law, and you want to see you want to see Israel adopt the same goals, essentially, as giant America, the 50% reduction by 2030. Given all the aid and given the historic relationship, I think it is your duty and obligation to be able to demand that of Israeli consulates and embassies.
So that's, let me ask, Phil Warburger is with us, has asked a really interesting question about the loss and damage funds, which is, will there be any tie-in to, for recipients to reduce their emissions? Now, many of those recipients have very small emissions, but nonetheless, it's an interesting question. And just for the sake of our listeners, whoever wants to field this question, just define, I know we talked about it, but let's define our terms. What is the loss and damage fund specifically, and how will it work?
So how it'll work is not yet determined, but Phil's
Right.
raising, I'm a big fan of his 2 books and family. I'm going to tell you about a study that Bloomberg released at COP. And it went like this. This is the amount of money of climate finance that moved last year. What percentage went to sub-Saharan Africa? It was 0.6, less than 1%. In that 0.6, that included South Africa, Morocco, and Egypt, which was like 90%, which means no climate finance, despite everything that was promised from Paris on about the most vulnerable communities. Almost nothing trickled to those communities. And the world does not have this right. And I frankly don't think you should even give these so much to government as to private sector, at least impact-oriented private sector, hello, because in these countries, transparency and other things are a big issue. But no, loss and damage, I don't think that's where it's going to come from. There's another 100 billion that's promised a year that's supposed to go to the poorest communities. And I do think that we're going to benefit and be able to build solar fields all over sub-Saharan Africa in the next couple of years. And that's really, really helpful. But it's separate than loss and damage. And they still don't know how to do it quickly and with integrity. They didn't move money in the last 7 years.
But by the way, you talk about solar in sub-Saharan Africa. Maybe you could mention the solar field in Rwanda.
Well, Brian and his wife are pretty soon are going to the Agahos Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda, built on the model of, you mean Ort here in Israel. 500 orphans, kind of echoes of the genocide. And the founding director, and even a good friend, Zichronali Bracha, she basically said, why don't you build me one of those Israeli solar fields, let me have some income. I was like, and no one's ever built a utility scale solar field in sub-Saharan Africa. Yeah, let's do it. And with support of the Obama Power Africa program and others, that field, when we plug it in, supplying 6% of the country's power, as well as revenue for the village to cover healthcare costs for 25 years. So I'm excited for you to see that. But that's the model. That was the first one for all of Africa. We just did one before Glasgow in the poorest country in the world, in Burundi. Average annual income is $274 a year. And we, the US ambassador said there's zero chance of success. 7 years later, which is painful, we're supplying 10% of the country's power with the solar field. And Biden right now is doing the refi. So thank you, America, as well. So, and this is where the US-Israel strategic relationship can do good things in the world. It's another example of this. So yeah, let's do more.
But can I just add something to Yossi's response to Philip's question? And just to say that initially, the European Union that actually stepped up with that offer near the closing of the COP to try to move things forward, did initially demand that it will be that the two things basically, that the donor list to that fund will be bigger, that countries such as China, Brazil, etc., will be part of the donors, will be giving money. And the other one was that recipients will be committed to 1.5 and to phase out fossil fuels and to lowering emissions. To the best of my knowledge, it wasn't accepted at the end. I mean, they went for the fund without the mitigation commitments, and that was sort of left for the phrasing of the mechanism, sort of saying who can get it, what are the terms, etc. But it's not, again, to the best of my knowledge, and I want to because that's what I've read, the final update that I've read, but that mitigation was completely off the table, and still we were left only with the loss and damage, unfortunately. But again, it's a complex situation because there is an issue of justice here, and are you in a position to demand but I think that alongside the fact that there is no phase out of fossil fuels and there is no strong language, there is not a limit to having the worldwide emissions by 2025. I think the combination of all those puts us on a very worrying track. I mean, we're not on track to limit global warming to plausible.
Yeah, Tamar Zamberg had a good line. She said that, the Middle East, we're here at a hotspot. We're already at 2 degrees. I mean, we've already exceeded the limits here, and the Mediterranean is warming faster than the other oceans and rising fast, twice the pace. And she said, Israel has the ability, if we get our act together, to take this hotspot of the Middle East and turn it into a hope spot, which is a good line, but we're a long way from that on
Right. Well, that's a great segue to my next question, which is there's clearly when you think about kind of the mental constructs and our emotional constructs when dealing with climate change, there's the risk on two sides. One being too optimistic, everything will work out, technology will solve all of our problems, and but also I think there's a risk of being too pessimistic and being overwhelmed, particularly with young people, I see. And so I want to maybe leave the COP discussion with this question, which is, if you could point to one thing that gives you hope, using Yossi's, invite there, or optimism, what would that be?
To me, it's the kids, right? I mean, our climate march was the week before the election and the climate conference. So to just be out there with, I don't know, 10,000 plus youth movements, a much higher proportion of Arab youth than we've ever had before, which was wonderful to see. Like we're kind of in the sinking boat together, and they're amazing. The climate debate for the Knesset election was hosted by two teenage girls, like 17 and 16 years old, my friends Nika and Dan. And the 6 candidates were there, the minister was there, we broadcasted on Democrat TV. And they have, going back to that moral authority that we started with in terms of like religious leaders, they definitely, I think, are the only ones that can actually get through, maybe more often than us old timers who are used to the hand-to-hand combat, and the decision makers know what we're going to say already. So for me, that is a source of hope. And also, if you go up the Red Sea from Sharm el-Sheikh, just a couple hours, you hit Eilat, and from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea is the first region in the world powered 100% by the sun. And we hit the 2030 goals in 2020, and we're going to hit the 2050 goals, 100% day and night, in 2025. This is the rebuke to all 197 nations there that were like dragging their feet. That at least in the south of Israel, not the whole country, but in the south of Israel, we showed that it's technologically feasible, it's economically advantageous. It's actually not hard to do when you have the right, in that case, local leadership and the right kind of impact investors who, they need to be patient, but they can make some money. And so just right up the Red Sea is the hope. And so that's why I like bringing the teenagers to around the Arava. It brings both these points of hope together.
Super. Tammy?
And so I'm gonna actually was gonna say something a bit similar, but I think a slightly older age group. I mean, just young adults maybe. But really, I'm gonna shamelessly quote Senator Ed Markey, who in a panel hosted at the U.S. Center said that, and he was voted in by the power of young people and talking climate change. And he said those young people, this younger generation, they're going to be tomorrow's CEOs. They're going to be tomorrow's lawmakers. They're going to be the ones making the decisions, and they're not going to change overnight and suddenly forget all this climate issue that they are so committed to. And very similar words from a business perspective were said by Mr. Roger Matella, who's from GE. Yep. And he was in a panel discussing laws and lawyers and climate, which is an issue close to my heart, obviously. And he was discussing it, and what he said, and he was addressing the issue of the senator's letters that said that ESG, environmental social governance, is actually it's actually against torts law because it's acting together for a common interest, etc., and that businesses should be very careful in applying ESG policies, etc. And what he said is that letter doesn't matter because you need to rein in and to keep your workers, your young workers, and they care about that, and that keeps them on board. And your investors care about that, and that keeps them on board. And the issue of this demand for change, it's not like a request or a wish for change, it's a demand for change coming from young adults and teenagers and young managers and from investors, and it comes both ways. And I think that at the end of the day will have to push things forward. And again, the issue is pace, but in that sense, I'm really optimistic because you can see the change. Because you know what? No, we're not at the same place that we were 20 years ago. I mean, yes, that we're not on pace and we're not absolutely on track, but we are making progress, and we just need to do that, but much, much faster. But there is also another aspect of hope, I think. And the issue of climate has also a lot of potential, not only to push us forward, a much needed leap when we talk about environmental health and public health, for instance. So it raises these issues and environmental justice and all these things that were very hard to convey. Suddenly, people are more attentive to them. They listen to them. They hear it on TV, and they hear the discourse. But it's also an amazing potential for regional cooperation and collaboration. And I think if we're really optimistic and looking forward for the possibility of a different regional status of things, of cooperation, collaboration, and yes, even peace, I think that climate policy and renewables will be a very, very vital part of it.
Yep. Wow, that's great. Thank you both. That's terrific. And on the ESG front, I think we should, one of our future webinars, we should talk about ESG in more detail. I think it's really, I have actually a shameless plug. I have a book that's coming out next year on ESG. And part of that research, it's really interesting how ESG is not new. It's the companies have been trying to figure out what is their responsibility to the community, broadly speaking, for over 100 years. So it's a kind of a fascinating question. So let's go from the COP27, the world, and let's get a little bit. Let's look inward for a few minutes and talk about Israel. So, and particularly Israel politics and the election, and how will this impact? What do you see happening on the climate front and climate policy in Israel over the next year or so? Who wants the question? Yossi, you want to...
Well, I think it's a challenging time. I mean, Yossi mentioned it earlier, and said that we are losing a few champions, a few very, very important climate champions who spoke out, who actually did important work in the previous Knesset, in the previous parliament, and there won't be there to do the work in the coming parliament. So nothing is final yet. We don't have a government yet. We don't know who is going to be in office. But I think it's going to be a real test to what has traditionally been the case in Israel, and it's not the case in the United States. And the fact that climate and environment are not a matter of political affiliates. Okay, you can be. We have seen amazing environmental ministers that came from right-wing parties. We have seen religious members of Knesset work vigilantly to protect environmental rights, and we've seen it on the left side. And this has actually been an issue where you could see unlikely collaboration from all members of the House, from everyone, of all parties on this issue. And I think it's going to be a real challenge keeping it that way. However, I think seeing that a lot of the campaigns before addressed both a rollback on plastics and attempts to reform the judicial system in a way that will weaken Israel's Supreme Court, I think, and these things will greatly impact our struggle to protect environmental and climate rights. I think we have our work cut out for us. But I do think that there's also potential. I mean, sometimes we have seen people come from the that weren't previously interested and stepped into office and fell in love with the environment and with working for the environment and made a true difference. So we're hoping we'll work with everyone, and we'll continue. If we cannot pass legislation, we'll continue fighting for environmental and climate rights, both by dialogue with businesses and with all stakeholders, working with local governments, and going to court and to protect those rights through litigation.
I agree with that. Just to give you a window into a couple other dynamics. President Herzog will be there for another 5.5 years, so presumably. And the way he started out his consultations with each of the parties, and it was streamed on Facebook, he asked them, what's their position on climate change? That was his first question. It was great. He asked us if you should, like we kind of suggested, and again, he's been so responsive. I loved watching when he asked Mansour Abbas, because Mansour also is a friend, and he's learned the climate issue from a justice perspective. So having the President's Climate Forum be a continuum, another 5.5 years, we have another 5 elections, who knows, right? It's but having the steady sort of grown up in the room, being President Herzog will give us staying power as an environmental movement. I would say one of the great things about Adam Teva V'Din, and they're not paying me to say this, and I said this before to Tommy, is 2 years ago they worked so well with Gila Gamliel from Likud on almost got a climate law through. And the government changed, and then she worked so well, she and Amit and everybody, with Tamar Zandberg from Meretz and on a climate law. And so I think that because Adam Teva V'Din is seen as professional and again nonpartisan, we're waiting to see. I know Gila wants the position; should rather be education minister, but if Gila's back, it's not a bad thing from our perspective. Maybe, one never knows in politics, but I do think the cost of living is going to be a determining thing with the Haredim, and solar is just so much cheaper than gas, and when that gets out there, we're gonna have to start. Tommy, you and I have to learn, Yiddish and write for Kikar Shabbat newspaper on Fridays to kind of, get the message out there. But that's important.
Mhm.
So as activist and as Adam Teva V'Din, what's your highest priority, would you say, in the climate space for the next year? Right,
Well,
Tammy?
I can say, well, first of all, and we're still pushing for an ambitious climate framework law for Israel. We're not giving up that fight. We think it's critical. We think it's important. And we think we're already lagging behind, and we can't afford not to have it in place, not just for environmental reasons, but also because of security reasons and economic reasons. And it just doesn't make sense not pushing it forward. But we are also, and I think that's maybe the most important thing on our agenda, is translating the theory, climate justice, into real life, making the cases that will protect the most vulnerable communities who right now are being run over and are overburdened with the costs of fossil fuel intense economics, and they are paying the price, and protecting their rights through legislation, through litigation, through advocacy. I think that's our main goal in the next year. That's our what we're committed to.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
my goal is to support Tommy in the climate law with a 50% goal, and to give expression to their values in climate justice, particularly around the Bedouin. This past year, we worked very well together, made some progress, but there are 24 state-sponsored schools in unrecognized villages that are working on diesel generators that are poisoning our kids. I mean, it's extraordinary. And just one of those kids were Jewish. I'm sorry to say, it'd be a scandal, page 1 of Yediot and all of that. And we've been working as a team to change that. We did get monies released for the first schools. So for me, the climate justice is super important. And I'm tired of sort of being that Ashkenazi American, progressive Tikkun Olam guy who's looking out for the Bedouin. I'm really hoping that this year we're going to be able to train and recruit Bedouin to be there to speak for themselves. And there's climate leadership. On the one hand, it's obvious because they're suffering the most. On the other hand, they have so many other issues, just making, trying not to get their houses destroyed or whatever else it's going to be. That it's kind of, and I'm really happy to say that we now have a Bedouin co-director of the Seder Harumi initiative, which is working on the schools. She's a powerhouse.
She's amazing. We've worked with her and collaborated, and she's really a malis.
Yeah, and I do hope that we're going to start a training program on climate activism. I remember, I grew up in America. I was like an APAC intern, and we used to, storm the hill on Soviet Jewry lobby days and other kinds of things. And I'd love to see there to be almost a Bedouin climate justice day that they organize themselves, with all of our support. So that's what I'm going to be working on.
Wonderful. So, there's this great organization called Friends of Israel's Environment. And we have two purposes. One is to raise money for Adam Tov V'Din. So that's a shameless plug. Giving Tuesday's coming if you're looking for an occasion, and also the end of the year. And we need all the support that people can give to us, and we encourage people to give financially as much as they can, or as little as they can. We just need support, and that all of that goes to Adam Tov V'Din. So that's the financial piece. But we're also here as true friends of Israel's environment, of both of you, and of course the organization. So my question is, in addition to the financial, how can we in the United States, and not just this organization, Friends of Israel's Environment, but how can the United States be supportive of your goals?
So I mean,
Sorry. No, you go, Yossi.
Okay, so I started a little bit before, so that told me. I really do think that the embassy and the consulates are fair game. You should be pushing that. I don't think you should be welcoming any ministers or members of Knesset to your communities if they're not going to essentially pledge to put this, to support Adam Tov V'Din's next climate bill. Go get them. It really does make a difference, and it's not impacting on security or the things that they say. No, you have no right to say anything. You friggin' do. Like, it affects the whole world, and this is the public face in the sense of the Jewish people, and so you have every right. And I want to encourage you. Maybe like Tu B'Shvat should be in National Day of not just planting trees, but protest of the American Jewish community. Go for it. Let the ambassador and let everybody hear about it. In addition to really the financial support, earmark it for the climate bill. I mean, I'm sure Tommy would be fine, because you definitely need to step up the lobbying there. But I think also aligning your investments and your values. I mean, there are opportunities, and Brian, you're speaking about the business opportunity, and certainly in America, you're feeling now the momentum of the congressional bill that President Biden signed. But it's also true in Israel, both on a technology side as well as I'm a solo developer. So we're always open to friends and family, and we the more money that we have access to, the more that groups, not only me, but there's more good that we can do. And I think also when you come here, visit the Bedouin. Brenda was just on before asking a question. Let's show you a Bedouin school on a generator, and then write about it and say how is this possible. Don't just see the Israel HaYafa, the beautiful Israel. Come and see. We're not a perfect country. There's a lot of good here. I don't want to sound too negative. There's a lot of great technologies here that could be part of the climate solutions. But check those out. I mean, I think check those out as well, and figure out your carbon footprint. Like I fly around on airplanes saving the world from climate change. I understand the moral quandary in that, and there's a good question: are offsets legitimate or not legitimate? It's the least I can do. This is the way I feel. We don't have a private car. We don't have any of that stuff, but I do fly. And so wouldn't it be something if each community or family would figure out their carbon offset and do your carbon offsets here? Because it doesn't matter where in the world it is, whether it's going to be trees or getting rid of generators in Bedouin, schools. Let's kind of link our fate. We're kind of back to this global consciousness in one world, and this interdependence, and that can work to our advantages as a people. Let's be the first carbon neutral people on the planet.
Perhaps we need Israel bonds for offsets. That's the
maybe. Good.
Yeah. All right, Tammy, you get the last word today. So bring us home.
So I agree with a lot of course, everything that Yossi said. I think it's very, very important, especially opening your eyes, both to the potential in Israel and to the road ahead. I mean, what we still need to go through, what doesn't work, the injustices that occur in Bedouin villages, not only though, also in Arab communities in the Galilee, and also all around Israel, and the underserved communities in Haifa Bay suffering from the contamination there and the air pollution. So yeah, open your eyes when you come. But other than that, I have to say that we find an immense value in professional collaboration with colleagues from the United States and with learning from American experience. And the first thing we did, I mean, we just dived into the Inflation Reduction Act and, you know, read every passage in it to learn what can be implemented in Israel and in what case, and where maybe we can even, you know, think of things maybe in a more ambitious way. And it really impacts, it really allows us it supports our legal work, our professional work, our policy recommendations. People listen differently when they know that the United States is already there, has already done that. So that's immensely helpful for us. I mean, that type of working together, thinking together, brainstorming how we together can move forward. So yeah.
Wow. I'm feeling very inspired. Yes,
Well,
you
Brian, this is a good chance to thank you for your leadership. It's like, there you are on the other side of the ocean, and this matters to you, and that matters to us, that it matters to you. And thank you for all you do to kind of bring us together.
Absolutely. And you know, there are so many of us. I'm just one person. We have a great board and a great former board members, and hopefully a growing group of friends of Israel's environment. So thank you for taking time today. And I know it's getting late there, so I really appreciate it. This was really inspiring and fantastic. So thank you, and we'll be in touch.
Hang on. Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye bye.
Always good.
Bye bye.